Good morning, genealogy friends. Sorry I'm a few minutes late. We've got a big topic today and I was getting all of my ducks in a row because I have a lot of samples to show you today. Examples of, oh, hi, sorry, focus in on that. This is it's a very nerdy topic. We're going to dive deep into photography types, print types. But as a genealogist, I think that you guys will find this pretty interesting. I don't know if you caught the live where I talked about dating photographs between 1800 and 1900, all of which, of course, happened in the last 50 years of that century. But it gets a lot harder after 1900, and we're going to talk about why. And I'm going to show you lots and lots and lots of examples. So I'll just leave this here for one more second. And let me remind you, if you are waiting to get into the Family Tree Notebooks genealogy group, it is because you have not answered the questions. If you could do that, that would be great. I think there's like 20 people waiting to get in right now, and I haven't had a chance to go through your profiles and find out if you're real people. Also, I will just tell everybody, I'm still having that problem where I get messages saying that I have Facebook messages and then I can't find them. So that's a problem. And I'm sitting on a whole pile of emails that I haven't responded to, but I will do that later today. I don't know if you guys have this issue. I get maybe about a little more than 100 emails a day. So when I don't jump on and clear it out, I just get buried. So that's kind of what happened the last couple days. Just mom life, kind of a lot going on last week of October. Okay, so let's talk about photos. My samples are all mixed up. I'll just move you out of the way, move you out of the way. Okay, so we talked about the different types of photography as photos got going. We talked about tintypes, and we talked about carte de visits, which is not at all how you pronounce that. It's a French word. If anybody wants to pop on and tell me how to pronounce that, that'd be great. I guess you guys can't really do that. And we talked about cabinet cards. Now, just as a heads up, anytime you've got a photo on a card, it's a card photograph. Usually they're cabinet cards. See, this one doesn't have any writing. You'd still call that a card photograph. I mean, I would consider this a cabinet card because it's the right size. And there were a couple other types of photography, but that pretty much brings us up to 1900. So one of the questions is, what do you do with things like this? This is on a card. It's on a stiff piece of cardboard. But if you look at the photo, it's obviously after 1900. Yeah, they still, I mean, you can still get things mounted on cardboard. They mounted prints and enlargements on cardboard by request when you got things reprinted. So just because it's on cardboard doesn't make it a cabinet card. Then it's just a mounted photo. This is a cabinet card. Where's an example of not a cabinet card? Well, this is a mounted photo with the frame. Okay, so you've got all these photos. How do you figure out when they were from? After 1900, you really have to use clues. That's the easiest way. So let's run through the history of photography or photo prints for the next 100 years, and then we'll talk about using clues to pull out details. Okay, so I'll push this over. So this big thing happens. In the 1880s, somebody comes up with, and I'm sorry, I don't have the actual names, but somebody comes up with a camera that can take snapshots, but it's expensive. It's, I want to say like $25, which is a lot of money back then. And it's kind of a pain. You take the photos and then you send the whole camera in and they develop the photos for you. In 1900, Kodak comes out with this camera called the Brownie, which is, the Brownies were really not high tech. Brownies were basically a cardboard box. At some point I'll get on here and I'll show you different kinds of cameras, but honestly, if you could imagine kind of a small shoebox with a little lens at the end of it, that's a Brownie camera. And so the first one comes out in 1900, but in 1901, the number 2 Brownie comes out, and it's cheap, like cheap, cheap, cheap. It's only $2. And they actually, it's so cheap that they market it to children because it's really sturdy and it's incredibly easy to use and it's really affordable. So, and the whole Kodak thing is you push the button and we'll do the rest. And in the beginning, the Kodak Brownies were kind of like the other one. You actually took the whole Kodak Brownie and you sent it in. But then after a while, for like 15 cents, you could buy film. And then if you want Kodak to develop the film, then you send it in, and it's something like, 10 cents per photo or something, which is not nothing, but it's really, really much cheaper than studio photography. And after a while, you actually, so Kodak releases this developing machine in like 1902, like it's right after the number 2 Brownie comes out. And the developing machine lets you develop the photos at home. It's basically this box with like a crank that you can run the film through. The thing about the developing machine though is that like this is not the photo album that I pulled out, but this is my great grandmother's photo. She had a Brownie. So she was in San Francisco at that time. If you can imagine her living in Chinatown, somebody just needed to buy this Kodak developing machine that was, meant for people to have at home, so an inexpensive machine, and then that person could just crank out photos and basically open their own photo processing studio. So we think of photography as something that really, is for us, that is a more modern thing, but people had cheap film, cheap cameras, and cheap photo processing at the turn of the century. This is huge. Because up until then, you really were relying on studio photos, or you were relying on somebody to drag their camera out and take pictures of your homestead, which did happen. I mean, people went around with cameras, especially, you go through a whole community at the same time and charge people for photos. But people were using glass plates, and that was the negative, and everything was really fragile, and dust was a problem, and all sorts of stuff. The Kodak Brownie changes all that. And then you get snapshots, you get candids. Now, it's kind of tough, to be honest, to figure out, just looking at a photo, okay, are these taken by a Brownie? I know for a fact these were taken by a Brownie because I know the kind of camera that my great-grandmother had. For some reason, she gets a Brownie when she's still living in the orphanage and she's a teenager. I mean, that's how inexpensive these are. So she has lots of those photos, and then these are photos of her as a young mother. These are photos of her children when they're little. So we're looking at the mid-1920s. Now you can see, though, a lot of these photos are the same size, but not all of them. Well, part of that is because Brownies had, they spit out these little photos. They start out square. It's funny, actually. The first photos were oval. That's just kind of like a dorky little fact. They were circles, oval circles, and they don't last very long. So if you have circular prints, you have prints that are taken by the very first snapshot cameras that were coming out. But Brownies spit out, these, they had rolls of film that spit out these like 3-inch by 3-inch photos, but then you could get reprints done in different sizes. So that's what kind of throws people off. Most of the time you got your photos back and they were this size, but then people would send it in and say, okay, I want this negative blown up and mailed around. So let me see if I can find, I don't know if I've got any of these. Sorry, I've got a whole stack of photos here. Okay, so these are both older. So like this photo, here we just have another like small Brownie size. This is from the 20s. It's on thin paper that bends easily. And this one is a larger on stiffer cardboard, the same kind of paper that you would print like a photo postcard on. Well, almost. Let me find a photo postcard actually, because that would be, photo postcards were really popular and they are hardy, so they last a long time. Here we go. Okay, this is actually good. Thank you for bearing with me while I one-handedly pull things out of my album. Let me just show you the difference between these two things. This is a photo postcard. This is a photo printed on regular photo paper. I don't know if you can see. Now, obviously, like, these photos have just been on different journeys, but this has some discoloration and dirt around the edges. It's got a lot of wearing and chipping to the edges. It's got creases. And if you look at the back especially, you can see the different creasing and stuff like that. This is a photo postcard. It has some wear, but they were just thicker enough that, or just thick enough that you don't get the same creasing and damage. So photo postcards are actually great for collectors now because they really preserve the image. You know, if you can see the difference. Anyway, this is printed on the same kind of paper as photo postcard paper. This one actually has a big crease in it, but okay, so one of the other things that you can figure out, like when you're just looking at pictures of people and you don't know, okay, so like this is a picture of a naked baby. I know who this naked baby is, so I know what year this was taken, but let's say you're just looking at a naked baby and you're looking at a naked baby on a beach and you've got no props, you have no costumes, there's nothing to tell you when this baby was photographed. One of the other hints is the fact that this is a sepia photo. I'm not sure if that's coming through okay on Facebook. The thing about sepia was not actually an artistic choice. So all of these photos were taken black and white film, you know, black and white. That's what the cameras were all shooting, black and white film. The reason that photos are sepia for a long time is because there was this kind of toner that they use in the developing process. And the sepia toner, it does something with like, oh, I'm going to totally mess up the chemicals. It's like silver nitrate or something like that. But basically, when you develop a photo with sepia, the photo is more durable. It doesn't fade as well, or it doesn't fade as much. It doesn't react as much to sunlight. It doesn't react as much to just the air. And they figured this out. And so you get sepia photos for a long time. The thing is, they fixed the toner and photos went back to being black and white, like somewhere around like the late 20s. And so by the 30s, by the mid 30s, the photos are back to being black and white. So if your photos are sepia, there's a good chance that they're taken before the 1930s. I mean, it could have been right up until the 1930s, but there's a good chance that it's before the 1930s. The other thing is that you are going to have a slow rollout of the new toner. So you might have some places, especially like if you're living in middle America, if you're living somewhere where it would have taken a while for them to catch up, then you can have sepia photos that last a little bit longer. But really, I mean, the photography business got competitive very quickly because it was relatively inexpensive to get started. And so nobody wanted to be the old-fashioned way of taking photos. And again, you have to remember, if photos have been sepia forever and then suddenly they're black and white, the black and white photos are going to look sharp and more modern. And, you know, it's going to be not your mama's photography. So you can sort of trust that color flip. Okay, so let me think. So we're up to the 30s now. Let me look at, what do I have from the 30s? Do I have anything? Okay, let's look at these guys. These are black and white photos taken with a Brownie camera while my grandfather was serving in the Korean War. So, I mean, I've pretty much jumped ahead, 20 years. But these are much sharper. They're glossy. See that? It's a smooth paper compared to this. Okay, well, that was in the light. It looks exactly the same. But these are more matte. And this is not the same kind of glossy, thick, really resilient paper. There's nothing on the back of these. It's just, I mean, as far as like there being a print on the photo paper, totally blank. These cheap little prints, again, this is how you're getting your photos back in the 50s, especially if you're overseas. Everybody's getting their photos back in this way, and then they're blowing them up. Now, the challenging thing is that makes the photos harder to date, because you get photos that look like this, and they've got this decorative edge, and they're bigger and they're on different paper. Unfortunately, there's not a hard and fast rule about the decorative edge, about the size of the prints, about anything like that. It really depended on where you were getting your photos blown up. I did pull an old reorder form. And you can see you've got the little square prints, the 3.5 by 3.5 or the 3.5 by 5. So those are going to be your original prints, or you can get the little tiny ones. And then you've got the option to put them on slides or to do color enlargements or to do, so that makes photos harder to date after a while because it's not consistent what size they're going to end up as when they jump into the family album or when they're mailed around, which is kind of tough. I mean, it's just easier here. The interesting thing is that I honestly think these were probably taken by some form of the Kodak Brownie. The Brownie lasts forever. They actually meant to get people started with the Brownie as children with this big cardboard box thing. And then Kodak had all these other nicer cameras that were supposed to be like what you graduated to after you finished using a Brownie. People didn't. I mean, the photos that came out of the Brownies were kind of low tech. You had to hold still, otherwise they were going to be blurry. I don't know if I've got blurry ones in here. And everybody's still pretty much using natural light. Like you get a flash. I think the first flash came out in like the 30s. But, most people are taking photos outside and stuff like that. But people did not hate their Brownies. So Kodak, after a while, actually stopped making this whole other line of adult cameras because the Brownie was like perfectly serviceable. It's funny, but there's actually, so in 1912, sorry, I'm jumping around in history a little bit, but I hope you guys find this interesting. In 1912, there's this 17-year-old and she's traveling with her family and she has her Brownie camera and she's on the SS Carpathia. And I don't know, anybody who follows this kind of history is going to recognize that. It's one of the boats that picked up people from the Titanic. And this 17-year-old girl, I can't remember her name, she takes pictures of the people as, they're pulling them out of the water. So she takes pictures of the people on the deck and stuff like that. Those are the only photos that we have of the people after the Titanic. And it's this kid who had her kid camera. And the photos are, they're in the Smithsonian now. And they're not bad photos. That's the thing. Considering it was a box with a lens on it, the Kodak Brownie was actually like a great camera. You can still buy Brownies. There's, what do you call it? Purists or whatever who still shoot with Brownies. I would never do that just because I feel like that would be a giant pain in the neck. But like I said, I'll pull my cameras out at some point and show you a Brownie because it's just sort of amazing that this really simple invention that they sold for almost nothing totally changes the face of photography for the entire world. Okay, so that was a little, excuse me while I just go off on random tangents. What else? Okay, so jumping around. So like I said, we've got prints that are coming out like this. That makes the photos in the 30s, 40s, and 50s a little harder to date because they turn out different depending on where you're getting them printed. What you can date more easily are these. I'm sure these look familiar. These are actually later. Does this have a date on it? Yeah. This is from August of 71. So slides come out. You've got slides out in the late 30s. Let me see if I can actually get a shot of this. Oh, ow, sorry, my hand cramped up. Oh, flip. Yeah, there we go. Slides come out in the late 30s, but in the 60s, like right at the beginning of the 60s, you get the carousel and the things that you put the slides in and then have the slideshow. So 50s, but really the 60s, people were having everything printed on slides. They made cameras that only were designed to do slides because of like the aspect ratio and stuff like that. But really doing slides is just, it's like this. You're picking how you want your photos printed and they're printing them as slides. The good thing about slides is that they usually do have that stamp on the back saying when the slide came out. And like this one, I don't know if you can see, this slide was printed in 84. My grandfather was committed to his slide carousel. So slides are not necessarily like limited to the 60s, but they're going to have dates on them, or most of the time. I'm sorry if you have some that don't. Other really obvious types of photos. Do I have one in here? I think this one's one. You get Polaroid. Now, Polaroids come out in like 1950 and Polaroids are more instant. They don't start out that way though. This is one of the ones that's like a stiff pull apart Polaroid photo, kind of says on the back. And then you get the Polaroids that we're more used to here in the late 70s. Polaroids unfortunately don't have dates on them, but if you look into the history of Polaroid photography, there are a lot of collectors and they actually will give you lots of samples of what the Polaroid prints looked like year by year. I didn't include a ton of them. I have a lot of Polaroids, but learning the year by year Polaroid photography shapes is like a whole different art form. Most of my Polaroids are recent enough that I know when they were taken, so I haven't had to dive into that too much. But if you have a lot of Polaroids and you're just not sure, that could be something that you might want to spend some time working on. This is, no, this is more recent, that's why. No, I thought I had another one and I don't. Let's see, no, are these, okay. Let's talk about the jump into color photography, because we've got black and white here, and then where's my earliest color? Let's do this one. This is from 65. Okay, I can tell you there's about 10, maybe, yeah, well, maybe 15 years between these two. We get into color photography. Now, here's the thing. It's Kodak again. It's on top of this. Kodak comes out with something called Kodachrome. I don't have any of those. They're really noticeable because Kodachrome photos, you had to send them in to be processed, and they're black and white film, and then dyes are added to create color. So it's this complicated thing. I think basically you had to send them all back to New York. And they come out and they look almost like magazine pictures. Like the colors are really rich and they're almost fake looking. And then in the early 40s, you get Kodacolor, and Kodacolor is what everybody uses. So this is I know this is a Kodacolor print. See, it says right there. And then Kodacolor, the colors aren't vibrant. They're they've got this weird, almost sandy overlay filter to them. But that's a Kodacolor print, and that's basically what everybody was using. I did want to show you, as we jump forward, what is this? Okay, so this is 1970. I can kind of do okay, so this is 65. This is 1970. And this is the 70s, and then this is from the 80s. Oh, well, no, I'll put me in the middle first. Okay, so let's look at the color in these photos. We've got 60s, 70s, later 70s, and then early 80s. Now, there's sort of a myth that you can just look at the color of a photo and be able to tell when it was from. And I wanted to put these photos together so that you could see why that's not necessarily true. Now, these were taken with different cameras. Obviously, they're processed differently. They're different sizes. There's no hard, fast rule about color. It has a lot to do with how the photo is processed, and it has a lot to do with what was going on when they took the photo. You can see the colors actually look a little more muted in this one and a little dustier, but that's because of where they are and what they're photographing. There's a whole lot of tan in that photo. Whereas this one, taken more than 5 years earlier, it seems more vibrant and more modern. So what you're going to look at here is you really want to be looking at the hairstyles. You want to be looking for props. You want to be looking for these beautiful little dates on the side of the print that tell me exactly when this happened. This is a hard one because my mother and her sisters are in what are considered culturally inappropriate Halloween costumes by today's standards. But you can look at what my grandmother's wearing and sort of get a sense of when that photo was taken. And then down here, this is my grandfather, who was a city councilman for Napa for a long time, and some of his other councilmen working on, opening a new thing for Napa. If you look at their suits, you look at their hairstyles, you can sort of see the cars in the background. that's a lot more reliable than just looking at the color of the photo. So when you think, oh, you know, all 50s photos have that, you know, bright white kind of look. All the 70s photos are more tan. It's just not a good hard and fast rule. And then this is a picture of me as a baby. So I can tell you this is from the 80s. Now the paper feels different on this one. Can you see it's got this like the softer matte kind of print paper? That is something that came around late 70s, early 80s. But again, if you're getting your photos printed at an old-fashioned or an older-fashioned place that isn't doing that, then that's going to mess you up. I wanted to also put this series of photos together. Okay, just to show you that this is also still kind of misleading. Okay, so let's talk about these prints. Now, obviously, there's this huge jump all of a sudden. This is in the 80s, this is in the 70s. You get these 4x6 borderless prints. So that happens very late 70s, early 80s. After that, it really kind of becomes anyone's game. Now you can look, it wouldn't be impossible for you to figure out this was taken in the 80s and not anytime sooner. It looks a little bit different than this one, which was taken in the late 90s. And then this is a photo of me and one of my babies taken within the last 10 years. But it's so subtle. So let's flip these over. Interestingly, you have nothing on this photo. These two pictures, even though this was taken, I think maybe 99, 2000, and then again, this was printed late. I mean, when was this printed? Does it even tell me? I printed this within the last couple of years. They're both on the exact same kind of paper, Fujifilm paper. So that's a huge amount of time to go through. I mean, compared to how much photography jumped around here, the fact that there's more than 15 years between these two photos are printed and they look almost the same is really misleading. Now, you can also tell this is taken by a cheaper camera. There's a flash. Now, this was taken by a disposable camera. I know that for a fact because my husband didn't own a camera when I met him. You can see this hard flash line back here. But again, there are people that are still using cameras like that. So that's not going to really necessarily date things as much as the fact that you can look at this and figure out, okay, when did my husband look like this? When did he think backwards baseball caps and oversized t-shirts were appropriate, you know, fashion? This one would be harder. You can't see much in this photo. You can't really tell what we're wearing. And eyeglasses have gone a little bit retro, so that's not really helpful. So this would actually be a pretty tough photo to date unless you know the people that are in it. People know when if you knew that that was my youngest son and you know when he was born, then that dates this photo. Talking about disposable camera photos, one of the other funny things about disposable cameras, so disposable cameras come out in the mid-80s. They're really, really popular through the 90s. It's actually really the first time that you get a lot of fingers in the photos. You know that, like, I don't know if I can do it, but like where you see kind of like this, but it's like the big blurry finger outline. The way cameras were shaped up until then, people weren't sticking their fingers in front of lenses. And, oh, hi, Aunt Darlene. Yes, I can. Sorry, my Aunt Darlene popped on and she wanted a picture of that Halloween costume photo. Anyway, so if you've got those photos where you've got the finger halo, I don't know what you call that, that's going to be a photo that was more likely taken in the 90s or sooner. As cameras have gotten smaller, fingers have found their way in front of lenses. So people will do that now with the smaller point and shoots. But it's funny because you didn't really see that up until the 80s. It's like they made cameras smaller and easier to use, and then we all stuck our fingers in front of the lens. I talked about photo strip photos on my Instagram. I'm not going to go into that now, but if you're interested in that, that information is over on the Instagram page. Trying to think if there's anything else. I haven't really been watching the feed, so I'm not sure if you guys jumped in with questions. We can go through some more of these just to talk about. Okay, here again, here's a card mounted photo, but you're gonna want to look at the fact, like, how is she dressed? It's a sepia photo that tells us this is probably before 1930. Same with this one, although, again, the fashions here are going to be more telling than the actual photo process. Cabinet cards. Let's see. I mean, usually hints in cabinet cards. I'm trying to see, like, well, obviously you have her dress, then you're looking at other props. What is that, a pillow? Her shoes are a good hint here. I'm jumping around. This is, again, back before the 1900s. One thing I will say about this, it's kind of in keeping with the fact that it's Halloween week. I see people who think that they either have photos of deceased people or they have photos of people and the people in the photo are deceased and the people who are sharing the photo don't know it. Here's an example. This baby is not deceased before anybody's horrified at what they're looking at. I actually don't keep those. So when photography comes out, it becomes not super common, but common enough to take pictures of people after they've died. That's especially with children and babies. And this is happening because maybe you had a baby and it died before you could get its photo taken, or you have, a young child and you haven't gotten their portrait taken. They would take the person, and sometimes it was an adult, but they would take the people to the photo studios and then they would, kind of prop them up. And the photographers would either paint eyes on, or some of them had actual little like glass things they could put over the eyes to make the people look like they were still alive. But you can kind of tell because if you've got a picture of like 3 children and one of the children is very much sitting as though they've fallen asleep with their eyes open, that's likely to be a post-mortem photo. You also have photos of women who are very obviously in like black mourning gowns holding infants. That's much more likely to be a mourning photo. But or a post-mortem photo. But the thing is, I feel like people are actually more quick to jump on that and be like, oh, this must be a post-mortem photo because I can see the brace or I can see this baby being held up. Now look at this. This photo, I don't know if you can see, this baby kind of looks like it's in this weird baby chair. That's not a baby chair. You can actually tell that these are hands. Somebody, probably the mother, I only assume that because mothers always take the brunt of this stuff, is under that big blanket thing and they're holding this baby up. This is the original, okay, how do I get a picture of this baby and have it hold still solution. That does not mean that this baby is deceased. I don't think that this baby is deceased. This baby's kind of holding its head up. The baby is aware enough to look concerned that its mother is under a carpet underneath it while somebody points a large, strange machine at it. This is not a post-mortem baby. Just because the baby's being held like this and is propped up that way, that just means that that's how the baby needed to be. You also get pictures like this where there'll be a brace behind the person. I mean, this is a more recent photo, but there'll be a brace behind the person and people are like, oh, there's a brace. That means this person was dead. Originally, everybody was in braces because you had to hold still forever. These photos took more than 2 minutes to shoot. And you're just holding still and trying not to move and feeling completely unnatural. And that's because the cameras were slow and everybody's using natural light. So just because you're standing in a brace or there's a brace behind your head, it does not mean that you are deceased. That being said, again, if people are looking unnaturally floppy or, sometimes, I mean, it's gross, but sometimes you look at a photo and like the person just looks deceased. And I've seen that before where somebody's like, oh, I found this photo and I think it's my grandmother. And you don't want to jump on there and be like, I don't think that that's your grandmother because I don't think that that person lived long enough to have that photo taken. But, be aware of that. Again, it pops up. I don't collect them. When I've gotten them in accident in photo lots, things like that, I've gotten rid of them. It's funny. I actually don't necessarily have a problem with postmortem photos. I don't want to own one. So I don't know if maybe that is having a problem with them. I don't have a problem that they were taken. That's not something that I need to own or share. So, yeah, that's kind of my random spiel on postmortem photos. If you have other questions, here's another Polaroid. If you've got other questions about dating photos, photo types, things like that, go ahead and just leave them in the comments and we can keep talking about them. But, it's much easier before 1900 because the technology was markedly different. And then after that, things change so quickly, and with reprints and everything like that, you really do have to rely more on dress, on what's going on in the photo, on wonderful people who actually wrote the year down, because it's just not super reliable to say, oh, this is a small photo, therefore it's from this time. oh, this is a black and white photo, therefore it's from this time. Just because advancements in photo development were fast, and at the same time they were uneven depending on where you were. So anyway, I hope that you've enjoyed this, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.